the first question I had was like, why Billings? What brought you to Billings?
So I think the thing that brought us here was my career brought us here. And so we decided to make it home after a couple of years. We said, this is the place that we need to be. We have a 16-year-old that was 3 when we moved here. So that's why Billings. Career brought us here.
Yeah. What do you guys think?
Same, actually. I mistakenly ended up here. Yeah, I applied to the wrong job. We were supposed to end up in Maryland, but instead of clicking on MD, I made a mistake and clicked on MT. Yeah. It's actually hilarious. It's the only job that I applied to in Montana or on this side of the United States.
But you went for it.
By mistake, but after speaking with folks at Riverstone, it was divine intervention. I felt like this was a place I knew I needed to be.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Same career. Of course, my career was athletics, so I was chasing one dream and got here, and that dream developed into a different one.
What would you say to other Black people that are thinking about moving to Montana or Billings?
Well, we had a running joke at one of the jobs I used to have when people would come in from out of town and they would approach me and say, hey, I got a question for you. I said, I bet you already know the answer. I said, there's more than you think and still not enough. And they, in reference of understanding, coming from California, it's like Baskin and Robbins. It's 31 flavors. You can't go a corner without seeing someone of a different race, a culture, where there's eateries in your entertainment. When you come to an area predominantly like this, it's not that those things don't exist, but now you have to kind of go out of your way to kind of find it and search a little bit more. It's not as just right there at your grasp. So I think it's really just understanding the adaptation of understanding, especially if you're coming from a bigger city, that you still can get a lot of the amenities and still get a lot of the love and feel that you have, but you have to now adapt the way that you see or go about that, and also understand that there's value in that. It's not a negative. It's just saying, okay, it's an adjustment, it's a pivot.
What do you guys think? Yolanda?
I think the more the merrier. It's funny because I met with Clark when he was interviewing for his current role. And so I was like, yeah, you should come try it. Like, if you don't like it, you can always do something different. And it's been a year now. So yeah, apparently he likes it.
Liked it enough to buy a house, so.
Did you buy a house? Good.
Yeah.
What does inclusion mean to you? William, what does inclusion mean to you?
I like to sum it up in one phrase. So when we talk about inclusion, it means being asked to dance once you get to the dance, right? And so a lot of times we talk about that word and we use it, and I think communities have a social responsibility to ask, metaphorically, people to dance.
You both do, you all do this, but you specifically are in inclusion, right?
3 of the 4 of us are, actually. So in this space, that's the work we do every day. So, it's important to us, and again, I mentioned this to you off camera, it's important to us that people understand we just try to create awareness. It's super important, right? We want to be solution-oriented, we want to be solution-driven. We want to work with people who understand that we want to create a community and a culture that allows people to look at us and go, I want to be there, not I need to be there.
And I would add to that and say awareness and understanding. Because awareness can only get you so far. You can be aware of things, but that doesn't mean you necessarily have the understanding of, right? Because once you have the understanding, then you have the opportunity to act upon it.
Do you think that it's received? Inclusion and the ideas around it, understanding?
I think you can't judge it like a stat. You have to understand that everything, especially when you're trying to change an idea of culture, takes a certain amount of time. And it's not something you're going to be able to point at one thing and say, oh, see, there, now it's working. Like, I think it's gradual over time. It's like chopping a tree down. You're going to keep chopping, you're going to gain ground. Then every now and then you're going to hit a knot. And when you hit that knot, you just reposition on the tree and you start again. But eventually the tree does come down, And I think the more we keep chopping away at it and just keep piecing it, because in some retrospect, you do have to meet people where they are, like we spoke about before. And that takes a certain level of patience and an understanding in that too.
I think inclusion is well received, depending on where you are. So I work in a space where We are always reminded about making sure that we meet the needs of the community. If you break down the overall demographics, the overall demographics of Billings, Montana as a whole, right? According to the 2020 census, it's 86.6% white, right? You have 6.6% that are native, and then from there, the rest of the populations go, I believe it's Asian, Latinx, and then African American. The population that we serve at Riverstone, if you break it apart just in our clinic alone, we're serving about 25% of the population, or 25% of our patient population is underrepresented. So if we don't take into account what people believe and what people think when they walk through our doors, then there's absolutely no way that we can meet every single need, right? Trying to run that race and finish it on time, it's absolutely impossible. But what we can do is be as informed as possible about said race, right? Like, so if you have hurdles in the race, there are very specific techniques that you have to use to jump each and every hurdle, okay? Every hurdle is a goal, right? If you look at it that way, you understand if you're running a race that's 400 meters long, you're a college athlete. Between each hurdle, right, you want somewhere between 17 to 21 steps. When you start the race, it's the longest part of the race. You have the most steps to take until you get to that first hurdle. By the time you get 3/4 into the race, that's where you're gonna start to really feel it. You start to get tired. And then when you start to try to finish up, you have to push through. Looking at everything as a goal, as you continue to walk through, makes it a little bit more possible. But if we take those goals, right, and we reapply it to the population that we're trying to serve and say, hey, this is where we're trying to go. I need you to come in and help inform the process. Teach me the technique to jump over your hurdle. Then we can get there. Okay. I'm proud of myself for that one.
We're proud of you too for that.
So, you just brought up those statistics. We're living in a predominantly white community here in Billings. Let me just ask you, do you feel, maybe it's intentional, maybe it's unintentional, but do you ever feel like you've been discriminated against?
Here, I think systemic oppression is intentional. And I think that it's something that we have to consistently work at to make sure that prejudices and biases and stereotypes begin to be broken down in a way that allow for all of us to just be who we are regardless of where we are, right? Race is a thing because somebody made it a thing. I tell folks, I don't know any person that gets up and do what we do every single day simply because they want to. There shouldn't have to be a conversation about, hey, I just want to be treated the same as you, that's it. There shouldn't have to be a conversation, but it is. And so we're the practitioners that are going to take the time to make sure that the information that you get and that you understand is the right information so that we can, just like William spoke to earlier, move forward because we're solutions oriented.
I think it's important too, and again, I'm gonna go back to this is just not about Montana. Right, I know that we're sitting in the state of Montana and we talk about things like racism and this, but I think understanding an individual's lens is important, right? So when you've never had to deal with something, then it's not our expectation that you would know how to deal with it. And so it's our social responsibility, I'm talking about everybody at this table, it's our social responsibility to help people understand that, there is something different. There is a difference between the needs and the wants and the desires of cultures. And I want to go back to the word culture as opposed to race. And that's totally different, right? Because when we talk about culture, we can talk about how folks in Billings that I've heard call Bozeman, Bos Angeles, because there's a different culture, although the people may look alike. So I think it's important to understand that we're just simply trying to provide a level of understanding, to Clark's point, that people understand that there are differences and we recognize and respect those differences on both sides. It's super important.
I also think what you have to start taking in is when you talk about the aspect of discrimination, racism, whatever, it's also a weird generational gap because how those before us looked at it to those of us where we are now, And then I look at like my children, my oldest son who's 14. It's not the same for them as it was for me, and it's not the same for me as it was for my parents before them. And I think that also is a different, I want to say almost lost in translation. I know there are times like, so myself growing up in Oakland, California, understanding discrimination to a certain extent. My sons who were born here don't see or feel the same aspect. My son, if you look at his crew of friends, though he's an athlete, most of them don't look like him. I grew up in an environment where initially my friends did look like me, grew up in the same environment as me, so we had the same similar thought process. So when I try to explain to my son certain ideologies of how the world may see him, sometimes he gets it and sometimes it's a little harder to get that example because he's never experienced it. He doesn't know what that, like, he can't tell the same feeling from that, you know? And so I think that also has to be taken into account, is that where are you in the sense of that and what you've experienced, you know? Because some people are a little more type sensitive to certain ways of certain treatments and some people are not so much. So it's a finicky thing to balance through.
Can I just ask that, you know, you and I talked about something on the phone and it's stuck with me, our very first conversation about Yolanda and your daughter and where they get their hair done. Can you talk to me about that? What?
Yeah, so I will say that it's one of the struggles. Before I moved here, I would go to the hairdresser once a week and I would get my hair done however I chose to. And here, that is not always an option, or it's not as readily available as if you were somewhere else. And so it takes effort on my part to reach out to people to ask, like, do you know how to do my hair? Like, you know, and then you also have a certain amount of, like, do I want to let them try to do my hair? And so figuring out all of that. And so I've probably been wearing braids for the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, maybe even longer. Because I can't just walk into any shop and say, okay, I need you to do my hair. And even if I walked in with a picture and said, do my hair. Whereas for you, you probably can walk into Supercuts if you wanted to and get your hair cut and colored and all of that stuff. Well, that is not always an option because my hair is different. And so I've had several people, I would probably say every time I'm in the store, somebody will ask me about my hair. And it kind of leads back to when you talk about culture and you talk about how you look at things and you talk about just giving people grace. So if I'm in the South with my girlfriends and somebody walked up to one of us and wanted to touch our hair or see what it was like, that would be a back up, don't even think about it. But for me, I accept the fact that people are just curious and they want to know what it's like. So I'll be like, sure, touch it. Like, I don't care. But my friends still cringe at me for doing that. And I'm like, it's different, guys. Like, I'm not in Atlanta. I'm not in Florida. I'm in Montana. And people are genuinely curious. And so for me, I can react one or two ways. I can be like, no, standoffish. But what message does that send? Especially when you're asking out of curiosity. You're not trying to be mean. You don't know. And so I look at it from that standpoint. It's a help educate and it's uniting because then you understand my struggle. You might learn how to do it.
So I want to pull it back up again, right? So to the point, it's nobody's fault, right? So Montana never had to worry about doing Afrocentric hair. They never had to worry about it. But as we start to look, and the thing I like to look at is, you know, again, when we talk about this subject, when we look at it from a pain point from this perspective. Montana has an unemployment rate right now under 2.5%. So that everybody in Montana who wants to work is working. And why I say that is that we're going to have to recruit from other areas to ensure that our community continues to thrive. If that's the case, we're no longer recruiting employees, we're recruiting families. And so when I moved to Montana, my wife came with me, right? I will be completely honest. I didn't think about how she was gonna get her hair done because I never had to think about it. So part of that social responsibility lands on me as well. But making the community aware that, oh, wait a minute, there's not a place, it's just simply awareness. So those are some of the struggles, and I use that word relative, that we have to think about that some others may not have to think about.
That's funny because before we moved out here, I think it was 2 days before we made the official move, I went and got my hair done. Because I knew, I already knew. I already knew what was coming down the pipeline.
But I think it goes back to the earlier point in the conversation when we asked about how will we tell the others to come here, it's understanding that fact. That even on our side, there's got to be a certain level of patience. You know, like Yolanda dealt with my mother when she would come to visit. She's very Afrocentric. She likes the short hairs, or she's had braids and dreads, and she likes a lot of Afrocentric clothing. And so when she first came here, she was highly uncomfortable because she felt like people were staring at her, or in a sense kind of gawking at her. And I had to get her to understand, like, Ma, it's not what you feel that is. Though I can't tell her her feelings are wrong, but it's getting to understand the perspective of understanding they're not trying to be mean, they're not trying to stare at you to make you feel a certain way. They really just have never seen anything like you. They haven't seen that. It's not something that on their everyday process that they see. So like with anything, like with any of us, if we sat here and all of a sudden they brought in a famous work of art, we would stare at it with a certain level of admiration because I've never seen that before, especially in person, and it's similar to that thought, is understanding that every comfortable point of race is that same undertone. It just feels like it in some ways. And so it's just getting those who would come in to understand that it's an adjustment for us as well. Don't come in with an expectation that it has to be said a certain way. Be willing to have a little give yourself, and you can make this situation a much more productive situation.
I love that you just parallel Blackness with a beautiful work of art.
I mean, because truthfully, that's how I see a lot of us. All of us are some aspects of art, painting, in understanding that, like, most people, or if you're not in the art world, and somebody brought in a painting, you don't know why it's valuable. You weren't taught that. We weren't taught to understand why it's valuable. We're just told that it is. So we accept the answer. But you take the average, everyday person in there, and they're gonna be like, all right, that's cool. They don't know why. You take somebody who's actually been educated in art, and they're gonna give you a full description to a detail of why now it has this value of this dollar amount and this. And so then your perspective changes. You know what I mean? So a lot of it does come to being educated. More information, the better all of us move.
Maybe this is a question for you, but I was trying to prepare for this interview yesterday, and I was talking with a colleague of mine, and he had mentioned the talk, and my response to him was, "Oh, you mean like the birds and the bees, right?" When you hear that in an awareness, what does that mean?
In the sense of racial relations, or in the sense of, that's an interesting one.
The talk is the question?
The talk. He said the talk.
Interesting.
Let me slide on this.
Yeah, please. Yeah, because I'm gonna need a minute.
I don't know what the talk is, right? And I said that from the standpoint, I'm raising a 16-year-old young lady who the talk is, however, her dictation needs to be able to be transferable in any community. Right. So I don't know what the talk is. Now, if they're talking about lingo that's respective to different regions, that's different, right? Because even though we look alike on the outside, California doesn't speak like Florida, right? Just like Scobie doesn't speak like Fort Peck, right? So I don't know what the talk is.
Wait, is the talk about if you get pulled over by a police officer, or that? That talk is what she's referring to.
I was gonna let y'all.
I was kind of waiting. I'm like, I think this is the talk she's
I was gonna let y'all keep going because we on the same page.
What talk she's talking about.
Hey, yeah, I was kind of on your page, like,
I was literally like, you mean like the birds and the bees, right? He's like, no.
Oh, you
And
talking
only
about?
because I've heard.
That's what I've heard too. I mean, after he said it, I was like, oh, yeah, okay, now I know. But I didn't go there immediately. And I guess you didn't go there either immediately.
Oh, no. Well, and I think it's because the talk is so ingrained. We don't even think about it. Like if I'm gonna get pulled over by anybody, my first response is, how do I get home, right? Anything in between, I don't care about, right? Yeah. So yeah, if I'm talking to a person of color, female or male, by the way, it's like, here's the deal. Your idea is to get home, right? And to have a level of respect. Now, I can't control what happens on the other end, but I can live to talk about it, and that's what I want to get through. So I try to instill that. I work with 7 or 8 school districts here in the state of Montana with people of color, and I just, I'm on reservations. Like, just keep that in mind. Your parents want to see you, so everything in between that, it doesn't really matter.
For me, talking to my son, who's 14, doesn't drive, it's just in general talk of just understanding how the world sees you opposed to how they see your friends, in instance. It's not so much to create biases, but it's for him to understand that not everybody is going to judge you similar. When you're with your predominantly Caucasian friends, Native American friends, whatever, you're still the black guy in the group. You know, there was an incident at school that he had once where that kind of prevailed out. And it wasn't for him to get angry in that situation, it's for him to understand that. And I think even as us as Black Americans, that's one of the gripes that have been, is that we're not always given the same level of grace that other races may have. And so in understanding that, I want him to always have a perspective and understanding of how the world sees him, so as he conducts himself. Whereas I kind of coined a phrase, I said, always be the smartest person in the room, but you don't always have to let everybody know you are. You know what I mean? Which means that be always aware of your surroundings in a way that's different than everyone else in your group. Everyone else in your group, because of that level of grace, may be able to move a certain kind of way. You have to be smarter. You have to be that much more aware, because that same grace may not be given to you and looked at you that same way. And I think that's more of where our talks generally stand.
I'll ask you a question, Andrea. So if you're driving down the street and you get pulled over, what's your first thought?
Probably, oh man, I got pulled over and I probably wasn't even going that fast, and like, I'm gonna have to, I'm probably thinking, about the road and what I did and what I'm gonna say to the officer to try and get out of a ticket. And
I think that sentence, what I'm gonna say to the officer to get out of the ticket, sums it up, because what they're thinking is, how am I gonna get home to my wife or my kids?
Is today about to be that day? Is he going to be that kind of officer today? Who am I getting? You know.
I'm going to go on the other side of that for a second, because I think it's super important. Super important. There are a lot of great officers. There are a lot of great officers, and there are a lot of great officers of color and non-color. And by the way, there are a lot of bad officers, because at the end of the day, we're people, right? And so I just want to be clear. Like, I've probably had more great encounters than not great encounters. However, I always compare it to a restaurant. If you have a favorite restaurant, you eat there 100 times, and the one meal is bad, you talk about the one meal, right? And so that's what gets sensationalized and polarized in the media, that one bad meal. Now, we do have the talk. I talk to young men of color all the time about this, like, hey, listen, your posture, your position, your attitude in that 15-minute transaction can make a huge difference, because you don't know what that officer has experienced prior to you. So you don't want to be the example that he or she has to set. But I want to be perfectly clear, and I think this is important, and we talk about this all the time, is that there's some really, really good people doing some really, really hard jobs, and it's our social responsibility to make sure we educate those behind us.
And I would say the other side to that too is, because if my husband was a police officer or not, I would still say his goal is to come home. And so it's like William said, it goes both ways. Like you never know what you're going to get when you walk up to the car, and that goes both ways. So I think it's definitely fair to say that. And just so I came from corrections background before I moved into my old job, and so I've had really good experiences. So.
And honestly, even to his point, both their points, the stigma that is held in Black America to policing or anything to that degree is not so much black versus white, it is black versus blue. Like he said, there are good and bad of multiple races within that aspect of an occupation. And so it's really just more of that, of understanding that same premonition or same anxiety comes no matter who that is, because we're talking about a system more so than we're talking about the individual people. The individual people make the system either good or make the system bad.
I'm blessed to be able to say that almost every time, with the exception of one, that I've been pulled over, I've had an either decent or great encounter. But I would argue that it's probably because of what I've been taught. Like, I've had officers let me go simply because I'm a nice boy. Or because by the time they get to the car, I have my license, my registration, my hands are on the wheel. I have every single thing that is needed visible. And so when they come and ask me questions, I'm very honest. I try to tell people all the time, it's all about like that first response. So I used to work at a college, a small liberal arts university back in Michigan, and I would tell my students, you don't get to have a knee-jerk reaction simply because of the color of your skin. I know it's unfair, but you don't get to have knee-jerk reactions. Why? Because your knee-jerk reaction can lead to something that you are not prepared for. So what do you have to do? You have to sit back, immediately evaluate, and try to take care of business. That's it.
I kind of equated to this. One of the funniest things to me is always when you walk up and you see somebody with their dog, or you keep walking your dog, and the first thing somebody says is, "Oh, do they bite?" Do I teach them to bite? No. But it's a dog. If he decides today is the day he's gonna bite, that has nothing to do with my reflection of what I've taught him. Same thing in the sense is that police officers go through training, go through what they go through, but I just don't know that day who I'm dealing with. You know what I mean? And that's what, even when we've seen these incidents, it's a lot of that. You know, like you said, I've never had I've had some very gracious, officers of different colors. At times where I was dead in rights wrong. And they showed me grace, or they, hey, you know what, man, look, here's a warning. Just get this and that done. Cool, no problem, I appreciate it.
That was actually one of the biggest surprises, like when I came here. So I've only been pulled over once since I've been here.
Really?
Well,
For how many years?
Right. just about a year and a half. It was Memorial Day last year, and I was rushing back and forth to the store because we were redoing the kitchen, and the pipes to the sink weren't working, right? Something was leaking, and so I had to change the entire system. So I'm going back and forth to the store trying to make sure I'm getting the right fittings, but because it's a national holiday, everything closes early. And so I didn't even know how fast I was going. I was flying. I was going, I think, like 65 and a 35.
You were going 65 and a 35?
I had no idea.
When you're taking rim rock all the way. That's how you get your 12 minutes.
But I had no idea, because the only thing on my mind was, oh my gosh, these stores are closing. We have people coming over. The kitchen is falling apart. I need to fix this before, we cook the meals and this, that, and the third. And so I pull out of the Ace parking lot and I'm going down. Again, I didn't even clock how fast I was going. I was just trying to get home. And then out of the corner of my eye, I caught him just before he caught me. And I caught him, my foot lifted up, and then his lights turned on, and I was like, oh, no. This is, nope, I cannot, no. So I pull over, I let down, because I have tinted windows, I let down my windows. I want you to be able to see clear through this car, right? Let me open up this glove compartment, I'm gonna pull out the things that I need to see, or that I need. And the officer came up to me on the driver's side, and he said, you know how fast you're going? I said, honestly, I don't. He's like, tell me what's going on. I told him the situation. He was like, oh, let me get you out of here really quickly because I understand how that goes. I said, excuse me? What did you just say to me? He said, I'm gonna get you out of here as quickly as I can. He goes back, he's like, look, normally I wouldn't write you a citation, but you were going 30 out over the speed limit, so I have to do something. I said, I completely understand. He said, just do me a favor and slow it down. And he handed everything back to me, and I was like, what? And so as I'm getting ready to pull off, I turn around, because again, I'm just in disbelief. I turn around and I see that a second squad car actually pulled up. So back in Michigan, when you get pulled over, they will never come to the driver's side of the window, first and foremost. The officer will walk to the opposite side of your vehicle, and depending on where you are, they will actually not even approach the vehicle. They will allow for you to roll down the window, and they will stand back with their hand right here. Hello, how are you doing today? Right? And that is what I was used to. And so coming here and someone being like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. I'm still gonna give you a citation, but I'm going to be gracious in this entire situation. I could not believe it. I was happy to go to the courthouse and pay for my ticket. I'm being serious. I was, because I could not believe that that had just happened. Not to say that all my experiences in Michigan were bad, because they were not. But for that specifically to happen, it was a shell shock.
I want to ask about Black History Month, because this is going to air in Black History Month. Who is that person that you really look up to, or who is that person that you hope your daughter will look up to, or your son will look up to in celebration?
For me, it's no one person. I think I take a little bit from everyone. There was values in what Martin spoke about. There was also values in what Malcolm X spoke about. There are also other leaders and speakers that aren't nationally known or highly televised that create their own value and presentation. And I think, honestly, I limit myself if I only pick from one. You know, I have to, the more I pull from different people, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be Black. You know, there are people of the white community, people of Native American community that have ideologies or thought process that I also pull from. So I think it's more so just being consciously aware to just keep learning. You know, I feel like that's anybody's problem. If I think I knew everything, or if I can just take from this one source, that's where I fail. If I'm open to all, even my opponent, and I think being a coach, that's something you learn. You know, you learn from your opponent. You learn by actually indulging in what your opponent does to get an idea of how to go about winning. And like we always say, it's not about what they do. All we're getting from them is understanding in the sense of how we do what we do better. But that's what wins the game. It's how we conduct ourselves in that game. So.
I look up to my daughter. I think if, and again, I say that with all due respect to a lot of great humans that I've met, right? And I've been influenced, to Theo's point, I've been influenced by a lot of individuals, but when I look at how my daughter navigates a system right now, right, where there is literally very minimal conversation about the conversation that we're having currently right now, they just live, right? She's had the same core set of friends for, I bet, since she was 4. And we're talking about girls, which is hard, right? They're all juniors and they still hang together and they go through spits and fights like humans do, but they figure it out and they stay connected, and that web is so tight. So when I look at her and how she navigates that space, irrespective of color, irrespective of culture, she just gets it done, right? And I think if the world would take a look at how kids operate, I would be out of work. And I would be okay about it because I write a book about it and be done.
I love that. I love that, because looking at the younger generation, it is absolutely astounding. I look at my own parents and I think about what they had to go through. Like, it's devastating. And then I look at my nieces and my nephews, and they just do it because they've been afforded the opportunity to do that, right? Exactly. Because of the work that has come before them, absolutely. But it is absolutely astounding to me, because it's not something that, that I have to think about this. It's nomenclature. This is who we are. This is what we do. The world is consistently changing, and in that change, right, some of the lines that were so clearly divided, or that so clearly divided us, are starting to blur, and nobody can change that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely can't go back, that's for sure.
No, I don't think we want to, but I think also too, that's where a lot of the hardships are, is in the blurred. Because to put on the layman's terms, let's say the NBA, for instance, one of the biggest dispels is how the older generation looks at the younger players now, and how the younger players look back at the older generation, where sometimes the younger doesn't look back to understand the value of why they're able to do or move the way that they do. And so then there's a discord where the older feels the level of unappreciation. And then they also have kind of a PTSD of it. So when they see this new blurred line, this blend, they're not comfortable with that, because they're remembering what they experienced and what they went through. And that's why it takes so much communication, because it is different. For what my son now has, like his daughter, my son grew up with that navigation, but it was an automatic thing. He didn't look at it as I have a white friend, that's just EJ. Like that's just my friend. I'm not seeing my white friend. I'm not seeing. So even when I explain those certain nuances, he hears me, but he's like, okay. Like it doesn't hit him the same way. And sometimes even as the one teaching, sometimes I have to catch myself to ask myself, am I putting a narrative on him that's not actually his to carry anymore? You know what I mean? And that's where too, it does take that, and it takes even, like I said, for us to self-check and to monitor, because what we used to know is not the truth today. As they say, yesterday's price is not today's price. Does that make it a good or bad thing? No, it just means you have to be willing to navigate it at all, opposed to just standing firm and just, well, this is how I see it, so I'm just gonna stay there. Nah, that's where growth stagnates, is in that. Once you set your feet firm in the sand and decide your way of seeing that is the only way to see that.
Can I ask more about your daughter? I'm a mom. I got little girls. Like, what's the world that she's gonna leave probably the house and she's gonna go do great things. Is that the world that you want for her? Like, sounds like she's gonna charge right ahead.
I hope, and again, you asked about, I just want to go back to for a second about your Black history question. I think it's super important that we understand is that that's his story. We're trying to create a new story. So the story I'm trying to create for my daughter and help her to navigate is that the world is your pearl, right? Somebody unlocked the door before me. I took it off the hinges. Now you just have to walk. Like, you don't have to beat the door down. Just walk in the door and be who you are, because authentically who you are will get you much further than fighting a cause that happened way before you. So we don't even introduce that in our house, right? We don't talk to her about the struggles, and we haven't had many struggles, right? We've had some great opportunities, some great leaders, but we don't understand her life is easier because of the things that we've set her up for. So that's my hope for my 16-year-old.
I love that. Yolanda, do you want to talk about that at all? You want to say anything about that?
Of course, I agree with all of that. I think it just, I can think back for when Bria was 4, and cell phones, or think about like getting a new cell phone and how I would be like, oh my God, what am I going to do with this? How do I set this up, or how do I figure it out? And even at 4 and 5, she'd just like take the phone. And so whereas with me, sometimes you have a little bit of fear just because of past history and different things like that. Well, she would take that phone and just start doing things to it. And, that's just kind of her life. Like she's willing to try anything. She'll talk to anybody. She does not have, any major fears, which, can be good or bad. Like I always try to be mindful of like what my fears are. Like, for instance, I am not a fan of driving on the snow. I've been here for 13 years and I would still stay home every day if I could. But for her, like I literally had a conversation with William. Like I was like, I know I'm terrified. Like I will never be the one that teaches her how to drive. And at 14, her dad taught her how to drive, because I knew that was where I would have some struggles. And so I just look at it from a global standpoint of like knowing, having your own self-awareness. And I think that's what just all of this leads back to, self-awareness and, living and let others live. And I'm really big on like giving yourself grace. Me and my daughter, when I turned, oh God, I shouldn't say this. When I turned 50 and she turned 16, we got matching tattoos that says, give yourself grace. And it was, more of like, this is the world we're in. This is what we want to do. And we know that if you give yourself grace, then you tend to give others grace. And it's a free gift that keeps on giving.
I do have a question based on this same thought process, being that you do have daughters. Yeah. What is the temperament or the thing taught to your daughters in the sense of that race aspect, especially when they go out into a world and want to befriend kids from other nationalities, or get along, maybe want to even date or move into that spectrum? What is your feel and your family's feel in that situation?
Yeah, my girls are very little right now. They're only 9 months and 2 years
old.
old.
Oh, yeah. So you got plenty of years to decide that. I got you.
Talking about boys, although one of our daycare providers says that one's a little flirt. I don't know. But there's a reason I'm doing this story, because I care about conversations like this, and I care about the world that they're going to grow into. I want it to be all of the things that you want for your daughter. I want that for my daughter too. And I don't want any barriers. I don't want that to be part of the decision in her course of action. I want her to go steadfast in the way that she wants to go, either of them. I'm thinking of my oldest, I guess. and just choose whatever path she wants to take. And my job as a parent is to be supportive. And that's my job. My job is to be there to catch her in case she falls and something happens, and to be supportive in the decision she makes.
And I think for me, the reason why I even asked that question is not even so much to get this perspective of you to your daughters, but I coach football, which football in itself is its own culture.
Yeah.
And what I deal with, especially being a Black man coaching predominantly white kids, and that same blurred line we talk about, well, now I have a bunch of kids from two different spectrums. On the white side alone, you have the typical, I would say, or stereotypical Montana kid, rancher, listen to country music, this, that, and the other. Then, no, don't get me wrong, it's not a knock. But what I say is, the point in that is that, but on the other end, I have the white kids who want to fully indulge in the Black culture. They want to rap the songs that they hear, and they want to say the words that are allowed to that thing. And so now I'm dealt with a new perspective of how to teach without ridiculing and making them feel isolated or this, that, and the other. Because now even my Black kids, if they hear the white kid, they'll both singing and rapping the same song and certain words, as we know, are splurred out. They actually don't see a problem with it. I come from a generation that did see a problem with it. And so teaching the boundary in that alone is a very slippery slope of sorts. It's trying to figure out, how do I teach a commonality of value without making anybody feeling alienated or that I'm attacking you and this, that, and the other. And so I think that's why I asked more of the question, because I think now too, another thing you're seeing is, and which is even funnier in that same breath, those same kids that want to indulge in that come from parents who didn't. So even the parent doesn't fully now understand this new version of child, because they're growing up in a way that they didn't, even within white America. And so that's a lot too of what, like I said, you got to really look at the generational gaps and temperaments, because they are different. And I think that's where looking into that and finding that way to navigate and to educate and to communicate is where you start finding the solutions of inclusion that actually start to work.
Kind of delving into that just a little bit more, one of my favorite quotes is by Arthur Touré. He wrote a book back in, I want to say, I think it was 2012. 2012. It's called Are You Afraid of Post-Blackness? And in the book, he says, if there are 1 million Black people, there are 1 million ways to be Black. What's interesting is that when you talk about culture, location should also be discussed, because the exact same sentiments, right, that he's bringing up in a very separate space, some of those things will be valid and some of them would not. I've had people tell me from time to time, well, I don't see color, or I don't teach my kids about color because I believe that everyone should be treated the same. And I say, well, I appreciate your perspective, but unfortunately, life is so much more than black and white. Right. And if you don't see color, you're missing out on a whole heck of a lot, right? Let's be honest about it. You're missing out on quite a bit. And so, like, I remember I had a very, I'll say, a come to Jesus moment with someone because they were telling me about their kids and their grandkids and how they're of mixed race and how they're teaching them, oh, you don't see color, this, that, and the third. And I told this particular person, while I understand the value that you're trying to bring to the conversation, unfortunately, your perspective is not widely accepted. And because of that, the moment that child or those children move into a different location and they try to hold on to the values that you've taught them, they will be sorely disappointed because somebody's gonna come out and say something that is highly disrespectful and highly stereotypical, and they're not gonna know how to deal with it. So as someone who does not have a child, right, there's only so much that I can say and only so much that I can do. But I do have over 25 nieces and nephews, right? And I try my best to instill into them the things that my mom and my dad taught to me. And one of those things is humility. A lot of times you'll hear folks talk about cultural humility. Take the culture piece out and just stick with humility for a moment. To have humility means that you are self-aware of how you inform the world around you. If you have a better idea of how you inform those around you, then you probably have a better understanding of how to communicate with them in a way that is palatable, right? It's not always about, to William's point, culture, race, stereotypes. It's not always about that. Sometimes it's literally about, if I can communicate this just a little bit differently, this person may be more willing to understand me or hear where I'm coming from.
So I think two things should be always considered anytime you're going to sit and have these types of conversations. Two words come to mind: respect and connection, right? So all of us want that. We want to be respected, and we want to try to figure out a connection. So I literally just taught a workshop yesterday, and one of the phrases that came up was just what we were just talking about, like, I don't see color. What people are trying to do when they say that is they're really at the heart trying to create a connection, right? So if we understand that, and all of us have been in the space long enough, I tell people, here's the deal. When you tell somebody that, I don't see color, you're cutting off half of who they are, right? What you want to be saying to them is that I respect all people the same. That's a different statement. So just, again, those of us who have been in the space long enough understand that respect and connection, they're grabbing for something. And so we have enough grace to give those individuals. You go to some parts of the deep South or some parts of the deep West, and you say that statement, and then people become offended by that. So, I think it's super important for us, and we talk about this all the time, that we educate, right? That's at the forefront of all the work that we do, education, and I think at the epicenter of that is connection and respect.
And especially respect, because I think the thing you have to respect is also the other person's perspective, even when the perspective falls short of understanding, because you're going to find that more times than you're going to find the common ground, realistically. You know what I mean? Because we're all products of where we come from. We're all products of what we've been through, and so in understanding that, when somebody fails to see our point, or as I've told people all the time, I understand as a Black man, when I step out into the world on a daily basis, I understand how they see me or the perception of me. I don't have a problem with that part. The problem I have a part with is when you try to box me in as if that's all I can be or that's all I can show. That's when we'll probably run into some level of resistance. But I don't mind if the initial thought process of me, as we used to say back in the faux pas, the lady who grabs her purse or this, that doesn't bother me. I get it. I get where you get the notion that I could be of danger or something. That doesn't bother me. But if you treat me in a situation, especially in a situation where you don't allow me to show more of myself or don't allow me to show that, no, I'm actually more than that, if you give me the opportunity. I've seen it happen in a grocery store. People's demeanor change the moment they hear that the way I speak and realize, oh, he's educated. And you can watch their defenses fall. Where before, when they're initial, you could see the tension in them. You're in the grocery line, and a lot of times we all get stuff together, and you can kind of feel them tensing up. And then you do something polite or something like, hey, you put up the rack for them. Here you go. Oh my gosh, well, thank you. And it's the unfortunate part that comes with being who we are. We're type sensitive to also be aware of that. Where those who aren't, as I've always said, the people who hurt never actually carry the scar of those who are hurt. So they don't feel it the same way. It doesn't respond to them the same way. Half the time, they're going to keep moving how they're moving because it didn't hurt them. Most of us don't change anything until it affects us emotionally. So those who have been scarred are normally the ones who have to figure out now how to go forward once you've been hurt, opposed to the one who actually did the hurting. And so those of us who have been hurt, or at least understand the hurt, even if it's just from afar, because we watched what happened to our grandfathers and grandmothers and vice versa. It's also understanding the patience that comes with that too, is that not everybody's gonna get it. As much as we want them to, as much as we keep posting it up and putting up the posters, not everybody's gonna get it. And that's okay too. It's just understanding that within that realm, I have to understand at what extent I need to engage in you.
It's noon. We did it. We did an hour.
Got all your questions?
Was there anything else that you guys want to say?
Is there anything else that you specifically want to say?
I was going to ask about food, but I don't know.
What about food?
We all have 1 o'clock, so you're good for a few
Yeah. I get that.
I don't know. I mean, people always talk about soul food. Is there soul food here? You talked about like getting your hair cut. Is it the same thing?
If you come to my house.
Right.
I was gonna say at Yolanda's house.
What do you cook, Yolanda?
Whatever I want.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
You probably should be asking William. William is more the cook than I am.
Are you the cook?
I toy around.
I mean, I can cook, but big holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, I defer to William.
Here's where the history is important, right? Here's where the history is important. So, again, when you think about it, and this is where I think history has the most relevance when you put black in front of it, right? So I think, and this is not William, you can go research it. African Americans, blacks were given certain things to cook that others weren't, and it was normally the stuff that was left over. So what we learned to do was season very well, right? So when you talk about soul food, my collard greens are your kale, right? Your baked chicken is my fried chicken, right? Your turkey might be my prime rib. So, I mean, again, I don't know if the foods are necessarily different. I think the preparation and food for black individuals is a connection. It's a true connection, right? So I think that's what makes the food soulful, is that when we sit at a table and break bread, it's like, you mean something to me, you're important to me. And it's not just at Thanksgiving, right? Every Sunday in the South, we sat down and we had large meals because that's where the soul was. It was on the table. Somebody poured heart and love into those things. So I think that historical perspective is super important, right? As opposed to people just saying, can we have soul food? Right.
And understanding to that same notion, it wasn't just a big meal just for your family. It was the open door policy to the neighborhood or to people. It was commune, You make macaroni and cheese, I make macaroni and cheese. Doesn't make one more soulful than the other. You know what I mean? It's still macaroni and cheese. No. But no. Hey, here we go. Hey, I'm not talking. I know where you guys are going. What I'm saying is in the sense of this.
Oh, you get there.
When I'm saying, let me get there. What I'm saying is in the sense of this. Like he said, we're taught to season better, but I'm saying in a basic layman's terms. If we're just saying what is macaroni and cheese, in the sense of just a noodle, cheese, and whatnot, how we bake and how we prep it. But what I'm saying is that in what we put into it and what we're utilizing it for. You know what I mean? Because I think too, even in understanding those type of labels to all labels, it's like we're saying, let's call it inclusion, but we find ways to define separation. Yeah. And that's more so what I'm saying, is that if I go to your house, you're like, hey, I'm making you soul food today. It's like, wait, what? Opposed to, hey, I made some fried chicken, I made some macaroni and cheese. You know what I mean? Don't over-define it because now all of a sudden the black guys come in and you want to feel how to appropriate me. Like, no, you made fried chicken and macaroni. Cool. Now, is it like my mama's? No. But I appreciate the effort, so you don't have to define it to get me to come over and indulge with you, And I think sometimes you find that too, is that people will, what they assume to be black, they tie to a label to it and they try to introduce you into that by saying, it's like the same idea of, oh, I have black friends. Suppose I just have a friend who happens to be black. You know what I mean? And that's more so where I was going with, not necessarily the actual details of the macaroni. I get that part. Right, the details are important. No, don't get me wrong. The details are important. But I'm saying in the social factor of it, is understanding that factor, is that you don't have to appropriate something black in order to get the black people to indulge with you. It's okay. We ain't the same, and we're not supposed to.
I mean, just let me be honest. My mama told me, you just don't eat at everybody's house anyway. So, I'm not just gonna come over and let's sit down and have a meal because that's not what we were taught. Right. We don't just go anywhere and dine with anybody. I love to cook, and people ask, how do you know when to stop seasoning? I say, I season until the ancestors whisper. Yeah, it's a feel. That's just what it is. Right. My parents never taught me how to cook. Don't get me wrong, my parents were are amazing cooks, right? I just sat in the kitchen and watched them. And so I'll pull a recipe off of the internet and then I'll say, oh, I want to do this, and I'll start it, and I'll be like, I'm missing something. I'll go in the cabinet and I'll grab it, right? And I pull it together, and I'm like, okay, this is my version of what that is, right? But for anyone outside of like our culture, what I did, like that's soulful. It's soulful, so this has become soul food for me, right? In a sense, right? It's not the traditional soul food, don't get me wrong. I can throw down on some traditional soul food too, but like, I'll just leave it there.
I think, but so let's step up again, right? There's a bigger metaphor, right? When you talk about Hispanic food, you talk about Mexican food. When you talk about Italian, you talk about Italian food. I've never heard black food, right? It's just referred to as soul food because I think blacks eat it, right? So again, I think we all have it, right? When you go to any European country, you can start labeling off how the food is labeled. But I do think food for African Americans, blacks, was at the epicenter of connection, right? That's how we connected. But I don't think like that soul word, I think, is overexposed because, like I said, I've never heard, and you all stop me from somebody say, we don't have black food, because I don't know what that is, because we all go in the same grocery store.
And that was to my point, what I was saying. Because like even within ourselves, I don't go to his house and say, I'm expecting some soul food. No, I just expect a certain aspect of me. I know my man throws down, hey, I'm expecting good macaroni and cheese, I'm expecting this, but I'm not saying that, oh, I expect him to cook me soul food. Like, what? So like, it's that.
But I don't think anything could be wrong with that.
No, it's not. It's just, no, I'm just saying it's just that it's not how we talk about it. It's not how something that we talk about, but anyone outside of us, that's how it's defined as.
I think anybody.
That's funny.
I think anybody, because here's the deal. If you walk into a house full of Italians, you probably expect Italian food, right? So, I mean, so I think you could walk into any ethnic household or culturally diverse household and like, whatever the majority is probably what I'm expecting. Now, that could be stereotypical, and some stereotypes are, by the way, based in truth, right? But I expect what I expect. So when you walk into my house, even if you don't, you could walk in and I can have the most beautiful Mexican meal made. It's probably not what you expected, right? And by the way, we do Mexican at our house, right? So it's just something to think about. Yeah. So, I think when you use that word soul, right, just because it's used for a lot of things in the black culture, soul music, right? Soul food, right? It's just think about it at a higher level than just it's a type. It's how we are sometimes defined. And by the way, accurately.
I love the way that you said how it's used throughout the community, because like soul food, soul music, if I'm linking the two of those things together, I think of how it makes me feel. Like when I'm thinking about soul food, oh my goodness, like just sitting down and eating some Sunday dinner with my family, that means the world to me. Like that's it. I don't need anything else. I don't need anything outside of this.
Because you connected.
Exactly.
So back to that connect and respect, right?
Exactly.
Like I connected with something through a plate.
Right. And if you,
I think all cultures do that, by the way.
And if you link that to soul music, it makes you feel a certain type of way. It's the feeling you get from it, right? It's the sense of community. It's the sense of, oh my goodness, I don't have to explain anything to anybody because everybody that's around me understands everything that I'm getting ready to say, and I don't have to re-articulate something in a way to help others understand me. Like I can just speak the way that I need to speak. I can act the way that I would normally act. I can simply be me without reservation.
But it's why potlucks work and don't work. No, I'm serious, right? Like, so think about this. Companies have, for those of us who worked in HR, any field who had to actually help people connect, right? Do a potluck. People are happy to eat, right? They are happy to eat. However, there will be a contingency of people who will be saying things like, I wonder who made that. Yeah. Or I wonder who made that. So that's the disconnect, right?
I was just thinking potato salad. That's one of the worst.
So it's important that we understand, like, this is just not about blacks, right? It's about that universal, how we connect to things. But then sometimes in our mind, we isolate or silo or segregate these things to a certain culture or a certain ethnicity. And what I'm telling you is at the core, we all want the same thing. And I think we don't talk about that part enough, right? We absolutely just want a couple of things. And like I said, at the epicenter for me, respect and connection. And if you look at this entire conversation and you go back and you drill through it and you look at this tape, I guarantee you the undertones at the bulb is those two words. Thanks
To you all. I will not take more of your time. It was really eye-opening for me, and thank you so much. I am just so grateful that I was able to sit down with each of you. You're amazing, and thanks for being a part of our community.
Thank you for asking the questions and hopefully normalizing the conversation so that others can have it just as easily.
And to that point, normalize the conversation. This shouldn't just happen on Black History Month one time throughout the year. This conversation has to happen all the time, but not necessarily on such a broad stage, but amongst us all. These conversations are how we all gonna grow. You know what I mean? Without these conversations, we're all left to our own devices and we're guessing our way through it. You know, so I think normalizing outside of the respect and connection, that's the third word that should be taught or tied in is normalizing the respect and the connection.
Or you can just watch The Cosby Show.